that a new class of tech stocks emerged as winners. And it was the eBays and the Expedias, because all of a sudden their business models worked because fiber became cheap. And so you had high gross margin businesses, and actually the winners of the post-internet bubble collapse were internet companies, basically.
Hello everyone, this is BTC Insight, and welcome to yet another deep dive into BTC Insight. Before we jump in, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't yet. You won't want to miss this.
Tom Lee begins by recalling a defining moment in market history, a 48-month stretch, roughly 4 years, when anything tied to the internet, mobile, or global communications went parabolic. It was the era when the internet stopped being a niche technology and became a global obsession. At the time, Lee was working at Smith Barney, one of Wall Street's most influential firms. He remembers how wild things had become. Every stock, with even a hint of internet exposure, from telecom startups to random tech firms, could skyrocket 5 to 10 times in value within months.
For 48 months or 4 years, where anything related to the growth of internet and mobile, and on top of that, of course, there was the emerging market story, because they were building communications networks globally, meant everything was going to the moon. I remember that period, but it was really an extended period where if you found a stock, and it could be a random name, but it was doing something interesting, it could go up 5 times or 10 times in a few months. And I remember that when at the time I was at Smith Barney, our salespeople were getting so accustomed to stocks having 300% upside that if you had a buy recommendation on a stock that only had 20% upside, they'd be like, "Come on, Tom, what kind of stock is this? I can make 20% in a week." And I remembered Smith Barney, we'd have this equity capital markets meeting and trading meeting weekly, and we would really talk about market behavior. And Smith Barney was unique because they had a very big retail operation on top of institutional. But every time there was a market drawdown, we would hear from the ECM desk and the trading desks how much retail came in and bought that dip. So it was a market where investors were buying the market steadily, and it, of course, did ascend eventually parabolically, and people were using margin debt very aggressively. I remembered many stories from Smith Barney about people who, instead of getting mortgages, were just taking margin loans to buy a house, and of course, the stock that they owned would go up, so then the house was free. So that did create a really reinforced period that I think resulted in a bubble. And as much as people kind of harken back and say they've seen it again, in the equity world, it has not been as pervasive, and it's been much shorter. And many people have been too quick to call the top. One of the things that happened in that late 90s period, and you know this, is that it destroyed value investors. That was Foster Friess and some other big macro hedge funds.
Tiger, Julian, closed shop.
Yeah, so I don't want to mention Tiger, but yes, they famously really got steamrolled because that style of investing value was really getting crushed by momentum and the reallocation. It was really boomer capital into the stock market. And then, of course, it ran out of steam. I think that will happen again. But to me, people who are saying today is a bubble are calling the top so quickly because it was really 4 years. That's a long time. That's someone starting their career and managing director or whatever. It's a long time that this bubble was really being created in the 90s.
In 1999, Tom Lee joined JP Morgan as the head of telecom research, just as the dot-com bubble was peaking. When it burst, it triggered one of the most painful drawdowns in history, a brutal 2 to 3 year collapse that wiped out trillions in market value. But even amid the wreckage, Lee saw something remarkable happen. 2 parallel forces emerged. Value stocks began to rise again, as investors rediscovered stability. And at the same time, a new class of technology companies emerged stronger than ever. Companies like eBay and Expedia began to thrive. Why? Because the infrastructure built during the bubble, particularly fiber optic networks, had suddenly become cheap.
I joined JP Morgan in 1999, and I was the head of telecom research. I was brought in, and that was the post-2000 period was really interesting and you're hitting on it, because the bubble burst, and it was a terrible, 2-year drawdown, maybe almost 3 years. But two really interesting things happened. One was value stocks actually ascended. So there was an ascent of a new class of stocks that really did well. But then in the middle of the center of where the bubble burst, where huge deflation took place, because all of a sudden fiber prices deflated and service and provisioning prices collapsed, that a new class of tech stocks emerged as winners. And it was the eBays and the Expedias, because all of a sudden their business models worked because fiber became cheap. And so you had high gross margin businesses, and actually the winners of the post-internet bubble collapse were internet companies, basically. I'm sure you remember in that period, because I was still doing telecom, people said there's so much dark fiber, we're never going to use it. They said there's unlimited fiber capacity. So people were just giving it away. And of course, now, we've used up all the fiber capacity. And actually in wireless had a huge collapse too, but it was a reset of the industry, because those stocks ended up, providing and producing huge returns for investors as well. The US government got pretty wise to trying to monetize spectrum. There were really many famous stories in the 90s, because I was covering the carriers, where I was sent to an Ohio town. So I'm working for Solomon Brothers. They're like, can you meet this dentist? And I would go to this town in Ohio, and this dentist in the 90s got a cellular license through lottery. He just applied for it and got it. And he put some towers and was collecting roaming revenues. But he was actually the richest man almost in the entire state. Maybe at least in the town, because he was making something like $2 or $3 million a month from a handful of towers. And he wanted to sell it, and these were actually quite valuable, and the carriers would buy them, and of course he was fabulously wealthy with all the cash he had just earned over those years. And so the US realized they don't want to necessarily give these away in lottery, and they began to auction them. And I'm going to get the number wrong, but I think that they've had 36 auctions or something since. And I keep in touch with some of the people who bought some of the original spectrum. Wireless spectrum actually has been a very profitable strategy. So it's almost like if someone bought in these auctions and held, the annualized return on the subsequent secondary trades has actually been double digits. So, and then there's a very famous sale that was Straight Path. AT&T ended up buying Straight Path. They actually owned a lot of millimeter wave spectrum. And I think it was the original WinStar, but Straight Path emerged, spun out of US LD, and it was like a $3 stock. I remember meeting with them, and this is past the cellular era. This is probably 2018, and it was a $3 stock, but they owned all this millimeter wave, and they talked about how this could be valuable for 5G. AT&T bought that same company for $240 a share. I think maybe 12 months later. So Spectrum has only gone up in value.
Tom Lee's reflections aren't just stories from the past. They're lessons for today's investors. Every cycle has its euphoria, its skeptics, and its survivors. The dot-com boom wasn't just about irrational exuberance. It was about laying the groundwork for the world we live in now. Streaming, e-commerce, mobile networks, cloud computing, all of it was born from the infrastructure built during that so-called bubble. Lee's message is clear. What looks like madness today often becomes the foundation of tomorrow's innovation.
That's it for today's look into BTC Insight. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay on top of all the latest insights. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll catch you in the next one.